6:30? 6:30.
I give you a minute.
Mine just clicked.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that.
All right, call this microphone on. Start this meeting of the Park Township Planning Commission. First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Any suggestions for changes? If not, I'd like a motion to approve.
I move to approve the agenda as stated.
Second. Are you the recording secretary tonight? Okay. All right.
Double duty.
Next, I need a vote. So all in favor of the agenda as written, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next item is approval of minutes from our meeting last month, April 25.
I did have one item.
Yep.
I did provide notice at the end of the March meeting. So if we could change that to absent with notice.
Yep. I was wondering about that. Any other
Thank you, just not.
changes? If not, again, I'm making a motion to approve.
So moved.
Suggested.
Second.
Right? Any other discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Let's see, the next item on the agenda is public comment. So public comment is for you, the public, to address the board. Please address your comments to me as the chair. It just makes things easier. If you guys saw a bunch of you signing in, which is great. If you haven't signed in, when you speak, we need your name and address. And then you get about 3 minutes to speak, and let's keep it going. It's not a time for discussion. It's time for you to say things to us. So let's start on the left side in the rear. Last row, anybody want to speak? If not, next row forward. No?
Good evening. My name is Cliff Black. I reside in Park Township at the Reserve. I've been asked on behalf of the board to read a statement that was communicated to Township Manager Howard Fink. And the statement reads, the Reserve of Lake Macatawa Board does not support the removal of mature trees along Wisteria Drive. We can support the development of a sidewalk bike path if the tree line is preserved. Let me know if you have any further questions. That was signed Donald McCarthy. He's president of the Reserve on Macatawa, Lake Macatawa board. So that's all I have with that. On my behalf, as a resident, I basically mirror this statement. I think that all of us at the board or at the Reserve enjoy the tree line. I live on the north side of the tree line, and we enjoy the mature trees very much. So we would really be just disheartened to see those trees taken off of Wisteria Drive to build a sidewalk to nowhere. It dead ends at the villa. There's also a path, the bike path runs along Division, which that extension of that sidewalk could possibly confuse wayfinding in that area for people on the bike path, making a right turn at Wisteria and ending up at a dead end street. So that's all I have. And thank you.
Thank you. No? Okay, now let's go to the back there. That's you, you're the first back.
Hi, I'm Melissa Fredrickson. I am at 716 Wisteria Drive on the other side of the tree line from the Reserve. And I am very against also removing the old growth trees. I look out my window every day, the city manager would have you believe that we have a ton of foot traffic down this street. I was in my front yard all day, literally saw 5 people walk by yesterday, maybe 15. I don't know why we should have to lose the trees. In addition, we've got a larger problem there with invasive species that are spreading onto my property, including Oriental bittersweet, tree of heaven, and garlic mustard. The bittersweet is literally strangling trees. The seeds are spreading into my yard, which I don't spray. I don't use chemicals at all. I've spent upward, about $100 in the last 2 weeks just to keep them off my property because they will literally take down a forest like wildfire. So there's no management. The path is, if it goes forward, the tape is right against the trees. I had an arborist come to my own property, and it needs to be a minimum of 3 to 6 feet for the root systems, or it will kill these trees. We've also got an owl and eagle family in the neighborhood that use those trees that we all enjoy very much. There's habitat loss. We've already lost the end of the street, the 15 acres for the villas. And just having that little strip does make a difference. And the sight line, I would see directly out my huge picture window, right into the neighbors in the reserves. And they don't want to see us. We don't want to see them. We like our little quaint street area. That's about all I have. I don't feel it's necessary. And if it is, there needs to be some serious planning when it comes to mitigating the invasives and taking care of those trees, because it's not Fifth Avenue, and I didn't buy my house 4 years ago to live in a suburbia type feel. So hopefully we can preserve what we've got there.
Okay, thank you very much. One, apparently not, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bill Van Nienhuis. I live at 726 Wisteria Drive on the south side of the tree line. I was very excited to find out that they were going to put a path there, because there is not a huge amount of traffic, but there's a lot of foot traffic on that road, and a lot of car traffic too. You've got 45 units at the end of the road, and you got a lot of people walking down that road down to the end of the water. How they have it lined out, and hopefully I'm against cutting the old growth trees myself, but yeah, there are a lot of invasive species in there too that need to be taken care of. It is very haphazard in that tree line. But what I am concerned about is the fact that in the document, it says that they'll have to put in a ditch. Now, why is that? I have no idea why that is. It's the county commissioner, road commissioner said, determined that the additional drainage was needed in the area and ditches would be required between the roadway and the path. And I'm looking at all of our roadways and all the areas in that location. There's no ditches anywhere except for down by the water, or as you go toward the villas. So my concern, if they're going to put a ditch in there, that means that that path has to move. That means that more trees are going to be needing to be uprooted and come out. And then again, a ditch is not something I want to look at. So I'm just kind of curious why a ditch has to be put in there. I do want a path, but I don't want a ditch. Thank you.
Want to speak? Okay. You're with him. Okay, anybody else? With that, we'll close the public comment period and move to the next item, which is what has been discussed just now. I think I know you're taking minutes, but you also what's the introduction? Yep. Anybody want to be a recording secretary for the township?
Well, I'm delighted to share that we've made a hire and we'll expect you to have a recording secretary at the next meeting, so that will not be me. So.
Maybe as our developer, full-time works ordinances.
So this development went through in 2019, so some of you were around for that, but I know that many of you were not. It's the reserves at Lake Macatawa. It's a PUD, lots of condos in there, and there's a little marina out there, nice clubhouse. As part of the PUD approval, as you're aware, PUD approvals need to show some kind of public benefit. The public benefit in this case was the little pocket park that's going to be at the corner of Division and Wisteria, and then also this multi-use side path that's going along the street. One of the conditions of approval was that if additional tree removal is going to be required in order to construct the path, that it would come back to the planning commission for review. So that's why this is here before you today. Your chair had asked me a couple of questions about the path. There have also been a question or two from the public that I can address as much as I can. As far as the ditch goes, that's an engineering judgment on the part of the road commission. I'm not privy to their calculations and probably wouldn't understand them if I saw them anyway. My understanding though is that it's not intended to be a 10-foot ditch. It's going to be something like, my understanding again, an 18 to 24 inch swale in between the roadway and the proposed pathway. What was the other item of the question? Oh, the construction of the path. This was a question of your chair. It typically, according to our maintenance director, is about a 6-inch dig. It doesn't go down terribly deep. Sometimes because of variations in soil, it might be 12 inches, but it's something like that. This isn't something that's carved out. It doesn't need 2 or 3 feet of sub base in order to construct. It's about 6 to 12 inches at the surface. The developer is here also to answer any questions, and I can answer if any of you have them as well.
Okay. So, first question, anybody, Terry and Dennis, you were both on the board, on the commission, this is approved, right?
It was.
Yes, so. You have a recollection of what happened at the time, but anybody may ask questions.
Well, I don't have a particular question. I do know that we did have issues in the development of the PUD in terms of ensuring the environmental impact and the aesthetics. We definitely were interested in preserving as many trees as we could, and I think we would resolve the issues appropriately at that time. Again, I don't have a specific question on this addition.
Okay. I had a question.
Yes.
One is for the developer and the board, but like in our HOA, the developer was in charge until some point when there were enough people, and then the board of the HOA took over. So what's your relationship?
So the association has taken over, all the homes are sold, so the association is 100% co-owner managed.
Okay, and so the developer is out of the picture?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you. One, there was a comment about it being a dead end. There's actually a fairly big lake access down there, and lake accesses are gold in this community. It's been when we were working on the master plan, for instance. One of the things people really want is lake access for the public. Because you have any idea how wide that access is? It looks quite wide to me.
I could look it up, but it would take me just a second to get to that.
So we can get to that. One of the questions, having driven by there are some big trees, there's some little trees, there's some scrub, there's vines. It's pretty much a mess right now. It needs to be cleaned up. So my question is, and I don't remember, who will maintain not the path, but the area there? Who is responsible? Dan, is that one for you?
Sure, it is typically the property owner. I know some of that area also went to, I think, the villas. The developer's attorney and I were speaking briefly before the meeting trying to make sure we knew which of the two PUDs would ultimately be responsible for maintaining that area, because I know that area was used in part as open space for the, I think the villas across the street. But either of those two condominium associations are ultimately responsible for maintaining the part of their common area. Okay, the road commission is responsible for maintaining the road commission's right of way.
Right, which goes, and I'm not clear, there's a whole fence there, maybe you remember. Where the road right of way ends, I would assume at the fence, but I don't know.
I don't know explicitly where the fence is and where the where the road right of way ends.
Yeah.
I do know that the conceptual approval originally by the Ottawa County Road Commission was to have the path, the side path within the right of way.
Yeah.
That the conditions to approval basically said it must be constructed to avoid existing mature trees as authorized by that conceptual plan approval by the road commission. And that if the road commission denied the request of the applicant to vary the sidewalk, or if the road commission requested additional trees to be removed, then they'd return here tonight for you to review whether you really want the additional trees to be removed or whether you want to forego the side path. So talking about it being a public benefit, sometimes we have what we refer to as the law of unintended consequences. And so the planning commission is going to kind of determine tonight, is the removal of the trees for a side path a public benefit, or is the removal of the trees to put in the side path really a detriment?
And that detriment would be what?
Well, it's basically, do you want
The
the side
public?
path or trees? Yeah, the public. Yeah, do you want that side path within the wisteria right of way on the north side of wisteria, or do you want to preserve the trees?
Okay, and a lot of you guys haven't been through much PUD work, but there used to be a bunch of them. And one of the conditions, PUDs are, just for you, not regular zoning. I mean, you don't just go in and get a subdivision and do it. You can do something as they did there, and clustering houses and then leaving some more open space around. So you can have some different sorts of development, but as part of allowing that kind of thing, the PUD is supposed to provide something for the general community. And I have found that difficult when we've done other PUD subdivisions, whatever housing areas. If you say do something for the public and you do it in the interior of the development, well, people who live there don't want all these people coming in, sitting at their gazebo by their pond, or whatever it is. So in this case, it actually worked out nicely, and that was that corner lot that was referred to earlier, and they can put a little park bench there, whatever, and wind a little path through. And to me, at the time when we did this development, this side path seemed like a very good thing for the community. Because having driven down there are quite a few people walking, not a lot, but not none, walking in the street. And I thought a side path would be a good thing. Plus, it gives access and is kind of inviting for people to go down to the water access there. So I don't look at it as a dead end. I look at it as a community benefit and then a way to get there. So that's why we approved it back then. You can always reconsider it, not always, but this would be the time. Yes,
60-foot right of way.
that's a big right of way. I can tell if there's a bigger one.
66 for a more modern street, but in older neighborhoods like this, that
Right.
is
No,
wide.
but I
A
mean-
lot of them are 33, so
Yeah, I don't think the ones in Waukezu are that way.
those are more like 33.
Yeah. I would think at some point that access will be improved.
It will be.
So having a path going there already, it seems like a good thing to have. What do you know about it? It's just that it's in the long-term plan.
Yeah, as we went through the master plan, again, we said access to the waterfront, both Macatawa as well as Lake Michigan are priorities to us. And as we are able to expand access to the water on road ends, so to speak, and the road commissioner gives us permission to do such, I think we'll move forward with that.
Okay. Just so you know, Terry is an elected trustee on the board and is the liaison between the planning commission and the board. So he knows things that I don't, that are more privy to the board.
Very few, though.
So that's,
Mr. Chairman, if I may have a question, I guess I'm a little confused yet in terms of ownership of the property. Once the side path went, if the side path was created based on its current design that's marked out there, it appears that it would flow both on the right of way of the road as well as on the property of the reserve. So how do we manage who's going to maintain construction and all that stuff that will go through all that?
The side path would be constructed by the developer. My understanding is it's going to be public, so ultimately the side path would be maintained by the township or the road commission. There would, if it has to change and move outside of the right of way to try to avoid some of the trees, hopefully that would be minimal, but still the path itself would be maintained by the township moving forward because it's being a public path.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. Could we have him come to the microphone so that it's captured in the recording?
and I know who you are, but you might say so thoroughly.
Hi, my name is Peter with Covenant Developments, and we're the developers of the reserve on Lake Macatawa. Is that okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, just to clarify, the path is in the right of way. In the public right of way. There was never a option or plan to have it outside of the right of way. So really, just again, as a quick refresher to when the approval was made, it was the original, I think it was all of our hopes, and I think I even heard it mentioned here in some of the public comments, that we could just put it straight down Wisteria in that open space area between the road and the trees. That was the original concept. And then the planning commission at that time had concern, as we heard also earlier, about the trees. And the whole concept was, well, let's make sure that if once the road commission looks at it and proves it, if there are any trees that need to come out, that we would be required to come back. And so that's why we're here. We had the meetings with the road commission. We've had numerous meetings with Park Township staff on site with the road commission, trying to get them to do no ditch. I've heard the ditch mentioned. And I don't know, we tried 3 or 4 times, like I said, including with Park Township staff there on site, meeting with us and the road commission. And they just simply refused not to have the ditch in between the road and the sidewalk. That then means the sidewalk got pushed out directly into the tree line. And that's where it was determined that we would have to come back here. And I've been asked like how many trees that is. So we did do a tree inventory. And to do that, where the road commission has determined that the sidewalk location would be, so that there would be 60 to 65 of the 1-inch to 6-inch diameter trees removed and 40 to 45 of the 6-inch or larger diameter trees would need to be removed. So that's, and then that is including, I think you guys have the plan where it shows sort of the wiggling around. The wiggling around is the most mature of those trees to try to work around there, because basically the road commission said, okay, you have to be at least 5 feet away from the road, but still in the right of way. And so that's how that current plan was approved and directed by the road commission.
So if I may, just to clarify, so,
Yes, sir.
so as it's designed and marked out there right now, that around the trees, et cetera, that's all on the right of way.
100%. Yes,
100%.
correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Mr. Chair, I apologize if I misspoke and said that it might wind out like right away. As the plan unit development was approved, it was clear that path that was referred to as a sidewalk in the PUD, but that sidewalk was going to be located within the right of way. At no point in the PUD did it say it was going to be located outside of the right of way. And again, to answer Terry's question, as a public path within the public right of way, it would be maintained by the public, being the township.
Right, so it'd be like any bike path,
Correct.
side of it.
Correct, but it's being installed by the developer,
Yep.
unless you decide that you would rather preserve the trees.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. So I'm assuming that there is, in the right of way, there is no land just north of that tree line that is in the right of way. So we don't have the opportunity to go on the north side of it. It has to be on the south side. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. If you were-
Okay.
Peter, did you happen, when you did your tree inventory, to take an assessment of the dead trees and the ones that are diseased or anything that of the total? Because when I went and looked at, there's a number of those trees that are going to need to be removed probably within a year or two, especially the big evergreens that are on the west end. That'd be right. Yeah, west end.
We were just trying to assess.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? One, the township will maintain the path. One question I have is who would maintain the growth?
So that would be the same as in any other bike path or right of way. Our maintenance department gets out there, they do a lot of mowing, they do a lot of maintaining along the paths. They obviously can't do everything. I think there's some work that they've done with invasive species. I know that they did some spraying, or I think that they did some spraying last year for the poison hemlock. But it's a lot of miles, so they do what they can to keep them clear.
Yeah, okay, thank you. One possibility is, and as suggested, probably by you, I don't know for sure, that we get an arborist in. I don't know, I'm sorry, it skips. The people that are working on the community park here.
ODC.
What do you see?
No.
Yeah, if we could hire them to go through and see if there's anything special, outstanding. I think in general, everybody's in favor of saving the big trees. And there'll be a lot of brush cleaned out. I don't know if we need an arborist, but it's just a thought. Hold on just a second.
I could support that.
Okay.
Get in there and really get a good assessment of the trees that are there. The health of them, as I looked at it, there, as I shared earlier, there are 3 or 4 evergreens, large 12-foot, 12-inch evergreens on the far west end that when I looked at it are ready to fall over.
Okay. So
I think that's I would support that.
and don't usually, but the comment from the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, one thing with the arborist. There's also, I did speak to Ottawa County Conservation District, and they do kind of the SWAT team for the invasives. That might be worth having a consult with them. And in regard to the path, one of the largest trees, that has actually been saved is one that should go. It's the tree of heaven, and it's like as tall as some of the oak trees. I can mark it, but those are just things.
If you could get that information for the
Okay.
context to Mika,
Okay.
I think that would be really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I assume as part of that assessment by an arborist, we're going to get not just the health of the trees, but identification of all of those that are there. I do think that's important, certainly some of our more majestic trees, I'd probably be more in favor of keeping. Some of the more scrub-like trees, tree of heaven, or even, smaller things, a little weedier. If we've got sassafras or some others that are, some of that newer growth, especially while it was a large number on the 1 inch or less in diameter, I'd be less in favor of keeping those over the sidewalk rather than, some of the trees that have potential to mature and fill in over time, and be more, long-lived statement trees for the area.
To build upon that, I think what would be helpful is if there are 65 trees and the arborists come in and say 30 of them need to go anyways. So where can additional planting happen? Once we say, it's really only 30 trees that we're talking about. So then how do we equalize that equation? So I think a plan to do that would be helpful.
And I could say that the condition would not require the developer to add trees if additional trees needed to come out.
No, it's not a developer.
Yeah, yes, in order to change the conditions of the PUD, you would have to have the approval of the landowner, which isn't just Peter Ingles anymore. In fact, isn't him. It would be each and every member of the condo development.
If I may, one other thing I would add, I think the benefit of the arborist is that when trees are removed or aren't removed, there's impact to roots. And I think there could be a lot of, that's one of the things, it's kind of like buying a house. You don't know what's in the walls, right? You make some assumptions, but you don't know what that root structure looks like. And I'd hate to see the impact to trees that are decided need to come down when you're also impacting trees that could be kept and are in good shape, but have roots that are feeding underneath some of those other trees.
And the arborist did that years ago on Lakewood by Bay Meadows. There were big silver maples there. Like in 1885, they were all red X's on them. So a bunch of people got excited and we kept them, and they're getting pretty old, but they're still good. And getting back to the township on trees, and this is just a little lobbying on a different subject. But everybody here in the township loves trees, and the master plan loves trees, and we don't have a plan to plant trees, which we should have. Like those silver maples I was just talking about, they're going to die, and there's nothing else growing to replace them yet. So, but that's a different subject.
It's related.
Yeah.
Important.
Yeah.
We talked about that.
So if I may, is there anybody who thinks we should, on the planning commission, who thinks we should not put in the second pay?
Mr. Chair, I haven't heard enough advocacy for it to really shape my opinion. Who is really anxious to see this occur? The homeowners?
To see the side path occur?
Well, then maybe you could tell me a little bit why you feel it's important.
Because it will give the public better access to our water access down at the end, and it's got to be one of our biggest water accesses. And at some point, as Terry was mentioning, it will be developed, and then we have the path going there already. And I think it would also invite people to go down there.
Once they get to the water, can they put in a kayak? Can they put in a canoe? Can they put in a motorized boat?
They do today. It would be, you gotta have a good truck to back down that hill. But
they do today.
yeah, I figured so.
And they bring fish and just leave them on the sidewalk.
Well, that's not right.
No. But where would these people park?
Part of the development, right? I don't know.
I mean, I think that if they need a place to park, otherwise they're gonna be on Wisteria Street.
Mhm.
I understand that, and this is not,
Right.
we're not having a discussion on it, but with the 60-foot wide access, you do have so much. I mean, that's wider than a lot of lots where people have houses on the lake.
So can we assume that for the development of that, for the public will come up to another review so that the villas and the reserves on Lake Mac that have condos and then development, and now you're gonna put a public access between us where you're gonna bring 100 people on nice days down there. You'll see some opposition, so I mean, you're gonna put a path for something in the future that everybody on the east side is gonna oppose, so, I mean.
I understand the question. Thank you. And, I don't know the answer as to if the township wanted to develop that land. Who is it that controls that? Is it the township? I assume the road commission, or have they deeded it to the township?
It's not deeded to the township. Typically, the road ends, if they're maintained at all, are maintained by the township. The Ottawa County Road Commission doesn't have a lot of interest in doing that kind of maintenance. So there's been discussion of various kinds of improvements of the road ends. Hasn't been discussion of that in recent years. There's certainly no plan in place, and that can look quite a few different ways. Typically, development of the road ends. And you can think of several of them. You've got the bigger road ends on Lake Michigan, Riley, James, I think. Those are ones that are used more frequently. There's typically not parking. It's typically intended just for the neighborhood or for people who can get there on foot or by biking. I want to say that there's one is there one in Chippewa? Is there one in Waukezu? I think that there are one or two that have a couple of parking spots, but typically these are intended for neighborhood use and people within walking distance. It's not usually meant as a
Yeah,
large.
James Street has room for 3 cars, maybe, something like that. Okay. Somebody wanna make a motion?
There's one question, so like the James Street you mentioned has a place for 3 parking, but cars could park all along Wisteria, just like they park all along Division. On
I
the
understand that, and I appreciate your concern, but this is not, we're gonna have a discussion. We'll have that discussion when we get to that point. Thank you. If I can summarize what I think, and I'm not gonna make a motion, the board is thinking is that we should get an arborist to evaluate the trees along there and maybe mark, I don't know, a tree of heaven, but say, yes, it looks like a nice tree, but it should go. But, you know. But we should save that one and that one and that one, those are special. And then the path might be rerouted. And I'm not one to speak on this, but I don't think Peter wants to pay for the arborist, but I don't know how that would be determined.
Excellent assumption.
So I would make the assumption that the township would pay for the arborist. But
Mr.
not,
Martin, do you
not
have
my
a thought on
decision. Huh?
Do you have a thought on that, Dan, as far as, because we typically don't pay for development expenses?
Yeah, you don't typically pay for development expenses, but there was nothing in the condition that indicated that the review would require the developer to pay for an arborist. It just says the applicant will return to the planning commission to review additional trees that would need to be removed. If you're gonna impose a new condition, you can't do that. You can't impose a new condition on the prior PUD
Well,
approval unless you have, sorry, go ahead. Unless you have the landowners, which is now the whole condominium association, agree to it.
No, so what I'm suggesting is that we wouldn't impose it on them. It would be a calendar delay, but not a financial burden, I think.
I guess I don't understand what you're saying. So you're saying you're gonna require an arborist to look at the trees, but nobody's gonna pay the arborist?
No, we will not have.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's what I thought you were originally saying. Then I think Mika was asking me, could we put it, because typically the township doesn't pay for development expenses, but again. The development was to do this as the Ottawa County Road Commission conceptually approved. The road commission is now requiring a ditch or a swale, which is pushing us further to the north. Requiring the removal of more trees, which is sending them back here for your review. The arborist would be a new condition. And so if you pay for it, that's fine. What I'm saying is forcing, it's not like a development condition because it's not something that had previously been required.
Peter, is there a schedule thing? I mean, if it took a few weeks more.
No, that would be fine.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I apologize again. Could he go to the mic?
When she doesn't get the notes, then her backup is the reporter.
Right. So no, I think a couple of weeks would be fine. Our plan was to do it this summer. And so we have people on hold now, and we've told them, I will tell them tomorrow, please go ahead and move forward with your schedules. And so I would assume we could still get it done this year, but I wouldn't be able to guarantee that depending on when we hear back.
Right.
But it would be our goal to get it done this year.
Okay,
Okay.
great, thank you.
Sure, I'll take a stab. I move that Park Township would incur the cost of hiring an arborist to come in and evaluate the condition of the trees, which ones are worthy of staying, which ones are not healthy and might come out, so we can evaluate the number of trees that we're potentially talking about.
And the location of the path, therefore.
And therefore the location of the path. Thank you.
And we have a second?
So moved.
Okay. Any questions on the motion? Or further discussion on the question? Okay, then we'll call to the question. I think we can just do a regular. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Nope. One, Mr. Cottonall is opposed. Okay. So that's.
I have one question. This ditch that they're needing to put in, can we get some information as to why they need a ditch? Because if I.
Okay, hold on, hang on. You can get information, but not from here, not from us, not tonight. You could talk to Nika, your normal officer. All right, and thank you all for your input. We always appreciate, people who live here coming in and commenting or taking interest in the community. Everybody is always, well, always one of the ones, but everybody's always well behaved, so thank you. That gets us to our next item on the agenda, which is setbacks on decks and similar structures.
So the impetus for this was that when a deck lands on my desk, it should be the easiest thing in the world to check off. It's one of the smallest things. It's one of the items that homeowners are most likely to do for themselves. It's one of the areas where things are most confusing and complicated when it comes to how it actually interacts with how things are on the ground. So the ordinance isn't especially clear as far as in some aspects, especially with things like beach stairs or above ground pools. But where we really run into trouble, the biggest issue is with second floor decks and PUDs. So when these PUDs were approved, I wasn't here. I'm not sure if there was a change afterwards or if there was a change of understanding. But a lot of these newer houses, and when I say newer, I'm talking like probably from 1990, 2000 and newer. That's the styles that typically have the second floor slider walkout. They were built, there's a deck put on the back. The house was built to the 50-foot setback. There's a deck put on the back of that. Now, a lot of these people want to replace their decks because they're getting old. Well, they're about 35 feet from the rear property line. So, and they're in a PUD, so they're not able to get a variance. So those are some of the stickiest ones that I've run across. When I look at past practice, I inherited some pretty variable practice. So you didn't see all of the staffing changes here at the Planning Commission as much, I don't think, because I think the planner was pretty stable. But within zoning administration, there were probably 5 or 6 people within the course of about as many years. And so there was a lot of variation in practice as far as what was actually implemented. So the goal of this is just to make it clear and to make it easier for people who are trying to build things to get stuff done so they don't have to go back and forth. When we're working with a builder, if we're working with someone like Peter, for example, he knows the system, he knows how to do things, he knows how to check the boxes. And You know, when I get a big house from a developer on my desk, it's check, 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 and it's done. Homeowners are the ones who are having a hard time with this. The residents are the ones having a hard time with this. So that's the goal. Happy to answer any questions. I think our chair had some ideas as far as questions to start with. Things like what are we trying to accomplish here? What's the goal? And how little can we do and have it make sense to people?
Right, and I think we hear it fairly often is, people should be able to do what they want on their property, subject to how it affects the people near them, next door neighbors and so on. So if we're going to set limits on decks, then why would we decide on 5 feet or 10 feet or 35 feet or 50 feet? What is it we're trying to accomplish with that? And I think one of the things Mika and I were speaking earlier is, like in R3, we have 15,000 square foot lots. Well, why? Because whoever wrote the ordinance said we don't want to be packed in like in the city where you have townhouses, you know, cheek by cheek. We want some space. We want that open field. We want, you know, big front yard, big rear yard. So we're aiming at that kind of field. There's no, from what I understand, the 10-foot side yard setbacks are intended for fire access. To get separation between the houses and for emergency access, but front and rear yards are pretty arbitrary. So, and then if you're on smaller lots, then what is your reason for limiting where the deck goes? And if you, I'm not gonna go a long time, but if you picture, for instance, if your neighbor behind you built a second floor deck right up to the property line, and they would sit up there and, what you doing down there? There might be some sort of privacy or kind of issues like that, so.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, if I may question
Yeah.
Mika on a statement you made, you said when they replace a deck and come back, that's when you run into an issue. Is that because their new deck is bigger than the old one, or you're just saying, even if they're just replacing what's existing, it's non-conforming?
Right.
It's non-conforming because
Because it doesn't exist anymore. So if you have a house, a shed, something else, if it's non-conforming, it's non-conforming because it's there, and it doesn't conform, but it's permitted to be there because it's considered existing non-conforming. With a deck, you have removed the structure. So if someone removes a shed, or they remove a house, or they remove any other structure, you also remove that right to be existing and non-conforming. So when the deck is removed, then that nonconformity no longer exists. So with a house, you roof it, you side it, you might change the windows, but you're not removing the structure. When you remove the structure, then you lose the nonconformity, and that's the same thing that we're looking at here.
Right.
And one of the other items with that is that we can't assume that a deck was conforming when it was built. Because decks are probably the top item that people don't realize they need a permit for, or they don't care that they need a permit for, and they're very often built without permits. I would be hard pressed to say when the last time was that somebody built a house without getting the permits for that.
so our current zoning requires that you have a 50-foot setback, but you can build a bigger, as big a deck as you want to the actual property line in the rear of your house, as long as it's only 30 feet high, 30 inches high. Is that correct? So most of this has to do then with decks that are greater than 30 inches off the ground.
Correct.
Thank you. Appreciate the clarification.
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Stan. Would the homeowner be required then to go to the zoning board of appeals for non-compliance?
Typically, yes. So there have been a couple of those. More often, what people choose to do is I'll work with them on the design and say, if you take off 5 feet here, then you'll be in conformance if you do that. I haven't run across too many that don't do that. At least in recent years.
I guess the permit piece jumped out at me, because you covered that in here, I think in your notes. And it seems like a lot of this, or at least a portion of it, and I know it's very complex and there's a lot of variables based on the different lot sizes, but it seems like the requirement to have a permit would be the first step.
Well, it is required, but.
Well, it is, but there's a lot being built without, right? So I don't know how that gets enforced, but I think if it does, it would help clarify for the builder, whether it's the homeowner or whether it's somebody they're hiring. And I suspect that not everybody that they would hire to build a deck would necessarily get a permit either. I think they would, but it's always possible that they wouldn't. I don't know how that's enforced, but it does seem like that could be a great first step. I don't know how it's messaged, how it gets communicated.
I mean, anytime if we catch someone building a deck, and if the building inspector is somewhere and they see, oh, they're building a deck and I've never seen that plan before, then they go out and inspect that. But you have to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time to know. Once the deck is built, the building inspector isn't out there looking at something else and thinking in every single house, boy, I wonder about that deck. I wonder about that deck.
So there are a lot of numbers. There are a lot of questions on these pages. So the first way I thought of attacking it was the why, which I think we kind of have a sense of, but that hasn't been defined. And to me, it's mostly privacy. And there's a little bit of if you build the deck to the property line, then if you want to maintain the deck, you got to go on your neighbor's property, which if you get along with that neighbor, it's easy. But if you don't, that can be a pain. So it feels like, to me, there should be some setback from the property line. And then the other way is to, I think Terry was kind of hinting at this, to divide it into at least 3 types, which is 30 inches and below, and make rules for that. Above 30 inches up to, I don't know, and then second floor, whatever that is. If the first floor is high off the ground, then it's on the second floor. So I think a height measurement would be appropriate. And then we get into all what are we measuring the height versus, but I would think by the ground that the house said that.
Okay, so you mentioned it, so I do have a question. When we're talking second floor, you're talking true second floor, or like when there's a walkout basement and it's off from the front elevation, the first floor of the dwelling?
It's typically the latter. I think that there are some true second floors. I think it's maybe more common from the second floor walkout. So it is the second floor in elevation from the rear, but not from
Okay, thank you.
We actually took it out, but we have a walkout.
Yep.
And on side towards Tom's house, there's the grass area down there, and it goes up the basement, and then the first floor, and then coming out of the second or third floor was a small deck. So that was well up in the air. 20 feet, something like that.
Yeah.
So that does happen too.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of at least exploring it from a 3 height regulation, whether or not a 5-foot deck or a 5-foot deck that's 5 foot off the ground is any different than a 8-foot deck off the ground. I'm not sure, but if we want to start, I'll start with a 30-inch.
Yeah, that'd be the easiest one.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
And I'm like you, I think there ought to be a setback on those. And I guess the question gets to be, Tom, you really brought it up. We have totally different setback requirements based on how big your lot is and where it's at, Right now, I'm become a very cognizant of this. And a little skittish of it because of what happened to our house with our next door neighbor. I now have a gymnasium next to me, so I have a blank wall, 60 feet long, along 15 feet off my property line. And so in reality, he can come and build a deck to my property line on the rear end of my house. And I'd get a little upset if that occurred, but right now, that's possible. So I think somewhere around, depending on lot size, we need to figure out what makes sense from the standpoint, and I'm not too much in favor of the percentage approach as I am just a flat amount, because I think percentages could in fact be kind of difficult to administer, quite frankly. And when you look at a 70 to 75% setback, go, whoa, that'd be a 12-foot wide deck. That's pretty restrictive if you're looking at that. So I think, how big they want to build it. We don't want to get into that arena of restricting how large it can be. I think you want to restrict how close you can be. Personally.
If they wanted a 1 acre deck.
Well, I'll give you an example. I had an 1,800 square foot deck in my house in Bloomington. Wrapped all the way around the house. And I didn't go out very far.
Yeah.
But
that's good size.
That's a fairly good size deck. Took me more than a day to build it, I guarantee you.
Glad I didn't have to power wash it. So I'm curious, if you have that second floor deck that comes out, and then a lot of times decks will come out and then they'll drop down to a lower level. So if you dropped that down to, let's say you had a 12-foot, and then if you had steps and you brought it down to a 30-inch, you could go into, so you could do a combination of both of those, right?
Yeah, and that's pretty common, and that is one of the
common.
fixes
Okay.
sometimes.
Okay.
One of the other fixes is if you only have a very narrow area near your house where you can put that, you can have that narrow and then put a drop down.
Right,
around it
right,
as well.
right. Okay.
Which, the image to me leans towards some sort of a slope. This is your high deck, and then you can come down and you can be further out.
Yeah.
Et cetera.
Yeah, and that
There's
makes
some
sense.
kind of
Yeah, that makes sense.
angle in there.
I think the visual privacy is, as you mentioned, that's what really jumps out to me, because sound wise, you're still going to hear people out on their deck. So what that distance does doesn't really make a difference. But I think it is vision. It is. There are a lot of subdivisions where you may have a 3-story and then a 2, and then there may be some singles. And so you start to see that variation in subdivisions now where you have
There's
different
a lot of that variation in my neighborhood.
Okay.
We've got a variety, we've got the ranches, the bi-levels, the quad levels, the tri-levels, the ranches that have the, walkout basements. So, taking the dogs for a walk this week, I was, being extra nosy, trying to look at what was going on in the neighborhood. And there was, a huge variety of decks and types throughout our neighborhood. It was a little tricky because obviously, I'm not the best at space, but when we're talking about privacy and, trying to maintain, I think I agree about the setbacks, from the property line. I think it is important based on the size of the lot. Because, I have someone who has a taller deck next door to us and someone who has a lower one. It would make a difference if they were to, take the taller deck as far as they could, to the edge of the house, to the property line. And, to Terry's point, if this neighbor was to add on a deck, it would feel very intrusive to have them be right on top of you when you're outside. But at the same time, I don't want to say that you can't have them. So just being mindful of what those appropriate setbacks and spaces are, so that you can have that variety, because I do think the variety is nice. But we can't always control the neighbors that we do have. And, you know, so you can't make the rules assuming that you're always going to get along with your neighbors, unfortunately.
Sorry.
I have no names coming to mind.
So keeping all of them.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, is there a differentiation between a deck and a boardwalk?
Not in the current iteration of the ordinance.
Okay.
Grand Haven Township has a great definition of some of that stuff, and I threw a little bit of that into some of the memos.
just gonna put up a 12-foot wide boardwalk.
Yeah, right now it's considered a deck, and actually the planning commission did see one of, or the zoning board of appeals did see one of these recently, where there is a 20-foot wide access to Lake Michigan on somebody's property. Well, and it was going to be an under 30-foot deck, which was the walkway, 30-inch deck. Once the building inspector got out there, saw the variation in the dunes, said, no, you need a railing, it's over 30 inches, and then they.
Yeah, I was looking at the list here, low decks without a railing, at grade casuals, etc. And then there's walkways and beach stairs and stairs. They feel to me like they could be moved. Low structures where you don't need a handrail, essentially.
Mhm.
And that would simplify things.
So to put them together as low structures that don't need a handrail, moderate structures that need a handrail but are generally first floor-ish, and then higher second floor structures, approach it in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes some sense.
And where that breakover is, the second floor is 8 or 10 feet, I don't know, it's somewhere in there. Terry, you were talking about minimum setbacks. What, you have a number in mind?
Yeah, I think we have to do it by lot size to some degree. In other words, maybe it's 10 foot is the norm, but then you get into our neighborhood areas.
Edgewood or I don't know.
Yeah, and you're dealing with really small lots, then we may want to think about a different setback for those. And maybe that's the easiest way to do it is by, what do we call it? NHPs, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You know, maybe there's some different rules for the NHPs.
What are your thoughts as far as what would you like those different setbacks to look like? So in the city, smaller lots, you can have the at-grade items up to the lot line, and then it's 2 feet off. My sense is that Park Township, it should be probably more than that, but when you get into smaller parcels, are you thinking they should be wider setbacks because of the constrained space or closer setbacks?
I think on the smaller parcels, the setback is reduced. If 10 feet is the norm, then I'm saying we're probably down to 5 feet.
Okay.
Would be how I would approach it or recommend it.
So is that based upon the lot size? What criteria do you use to describe that?
Lot size or zoning?
Or zoning?
I guess I'm thinking the exceptions for the NHPs would be 5, just all of them would be 5 feet. Now, if there are other areas that had smaller lots, then maybe a lot size does come into play. But I guess I'm thinking, why make it complicated? Let's let them come in for variance.
Right. So I think this unfortunately sounds like a zoning board issue pretty often.
And I like that because we can then take into consideration a lot of factors.
Right.
View sheds, proximity to neighbor's facility. So I think that's a good way to go.
That makes sense.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, it seems in general, you wouldn't want to allow a deck wider than what the the footprint of the house is. Like whatever that setback is from my side yard, and I don't know why I would want to build a deck that went beyond that.
Some people on the back they'll do kind of like wings around the edge, or depending on the design, they'll put kind of out, or they'll have something around the side of the house. Most often it does kind of end at the edge of the house. We have run into something a couple of times. This again has been a design change for the one doing the construction, but if it's a non-conforming parcel where they've got a 10-foot side setback and their house is only 3, 5, 7 feet, then their deck can't be up to the edge of the house as well.
Something that I think about, just because we've been talking about it, putting a deck on the back. So what happens when you have a deck and you want to add a screened in porch or a 3-season room? Because that combination often occurs. So to me, you got to look at all of that.
Yeah, and those need to meet setbacks, yeah, unless you would like to make them as exclusions from setbacks, but once you put that roof on there, then that's
Then it
no
was
longer
the
a deck.
standard. Yeah, okay. So that overrides the deck.
It does, but again, there are communities who will say for a covered area, whether it's a, and I had this in an original version, I thought, this is getting way too big. So I like, no.
Okay, that makes
But some
sense.
places will say a porch can go X amount into the setback, an open covered deck can go X amount into the setback, that's sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, because if it's covered, then it's more intrusive. So. The idea of stepping back at 45 degrees. And see what that feels like. So if you, for instance, your 30-inch deck comes out to here. You can't.
The upper
one can't come out even with it. You can't bring your second deck floor deck, but then how would that work if that was the only deck they had to within 10 feet of the lot line?
Yeah, and I can look at a couple of those neighborhoods. I mean, I can think of at least 1 or 2 where it's those second floor decks.
It's too separate.
Yeah, the 8 floor is when we're 30 inch.
Oh, setback. Yeah, okay. So like a 30-inch might have crossing number of the 10-foot setback, and an 8-foot might have a 20-foot setback.
Right.
Whatever the height is, you can't be any
More than
closer than that.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
Or double that.
In my conversation, I've been really just thinking 30-inch decks, not any closer than 10 feet.
Yeah, okay.
Decks that are higher than 10 feet, or 30 inches, I've got different thoughts on.
Okay.
And maybe that's what you were.
Right, it's like, how do we make that?
Yeah.
That distance is at 45.
Something like that.
I have a little perplexed as to why you wouldn't allow a deck to be wider than the house. Why you would think that would be.
I'm thinking of my neighborhood. We got 100 foot wide lots, and we got 68 foot, 72 foot wide houses. And I don't know, it just seems like that setback should apply on the side yards.
Well, I think a side yard setback is appropriate, but I wouldn't want to prohibit anybody from not being able to wrap a deck around their house.
If they're far.
If they meet within a specification.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think that 10-foot would go.
Yeah, I was just thinking my subdivision where we pretty much use up that whole width. Everybody max to there.
Yeah.
Your houses go.
Yeah, I see that.
Inches extra on the one side of my house.
I see that, but depending on the grade, and if you truly want to have that access from the back to the front of the home, I absolutely see the practical application for it, though.
We have, my deck goes around the side to get to the main
Yep.
deck.
Right.
We're gonna have issues, though, if it's then coming up to grade on the front of the house and the back, asking the practical question, if it's because you have that lower grade in the back and you want to have it wrap around your house. So it comes up to the front of the house, less than 30 inches, but at the back of the house, it's at 8 feet. How would we deal with that?
Got lots of height calculations that we already do with building height.
Okay.
I think we could probably figure that out. I can't see that getting tricky. We would have to think it through, but.
Yep.
take the average grade, and we take the average height off of the grade, and then we look at how it compares to the elevation.
Times pi r squared.
You land there, yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're really looking for here is guidance for Mika to write an ordinance. The simpler the better, clearer the better. I'm not sure that 45 is good. That means if you have an 8-foot tall deck, then it has to be 8 feet back. Well, it has to be 18 feet back from the lot line. Because you got the 10 plus 8 down to that setback.
I'm wondering if, you've mentioned a few different ways of determining reasonable setbacks. If I can try to pull a handful of properties and see how it looks for them, because I have some specific PUDs in mind where I know I've run into issues. There's a lot of variations in all these neighborhoods, and I think that's the trick, and probably why somebody said, let's just have them meet the setback requirements, because it seems simple.
Take a formula and apply the easy ones and the hard ones to it and see how
And then
it works out.
see how it works out. Maybe I can bring that next time, looking at a breakdown of kind of 3 different height requirements with the low, the medium, and the high.
Yeah. And I think the idea of by structures makes more sense than by decks or by, because what are we gonna build it out of 5 years from now?
Say more about that, so I know I'm understanding. As far as
Well,
my structures.
you know, why can't it be a porch?
Oh, okay, so include things like
Right.
the covered porch.
Yeah, if it's over 12 feet, it's, you know, still, it's still a structure. The deck is still a structure. And, you know, and I guess the question is, so I can build concrete all the way to within 10 feet of my lot line.
Right.
That's a structure.
But, so a couple of things, just to clarify. Are you including a roof in there, that the roof is part of the structure, and if you have a roof, it has to be further back?
I don't know if we got that question, but I'm thinking of basketball court.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a structure of
Ground level.
Ground level, it's less than 30 feet, less than 30 inches.
Yeah.
But it's gotta be 10 feet away from the back lot. Using my example. Okay, don't want a basketball court.
Well, that may
Just because if we call it a deck, then somebody's gonna pour concrete and say, well, it's not a deck.
Yeah, so it's a
Structure. Two
Right.
10-foot poles.
But it is a structure. I'm sorry.
It's got 2 10-foot poles, one on each end. So now it's 10 feet.
Or 30.
Just
Just a little point, right?
yeah, just throwing it out as a, I mean, you know, we're talking about what the future could hold, right? Yeah, I mean, that isn't even in the future. I mean, that's, you know, a good example.
So if we expand into flat work, we're talking about patios, sidewalks that go around to the back of the house, pads that you can park your boat on.
Swimming pools.
Swimming pools is on the list, we should still talk about tonight.
Later.
Quite a few things. So one of the things to keep in mind is if you have a property, you are allowed to use up to the end of your property. You can sit your chair right in lot line. You know, if you want to look out into your neighbor's yard, you can do that. That's why we let people build fences too, right on their property line. But if we expand into some of that flat work, we can do that, but that is a pretty big expansion of what we would be looking at for this. So
That would be like, even if you put in flagstones or something.
it could potentially be something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Landscape.
most often that sort of flat work isn't regulated. Sometimes distance of driveways and boat paths can be.
Yeah.
And then basketball courts, tennis courts, things like that. I think that would be along the lines of the pool conversation.
Fire pits.
What's that?
Fire pits.
Fire pits. I mean, there's an
Papers.
awful lot that we could say what you can and can't do with it. That's just a question of how much do you want to do that?
Ooh. Ooh.
See what I was rewriting.
That gets big. That gets big, yeah.
I see an awful lot coming to the CBA for this one.
My first explanation was if it's ground level, there's no restriction. or it's less, it's 5 feet or something.
It's feeling like short term.
There's no restriction.
Yeah. We could go around in circles. I don't.
So if it's ground level, you're like,
Under 30 inches can go to the property line.
yeah, it's almost a fourth, ground level up to 30.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah, right.
But okay, it's 2 inches up,
Yeah.
Well, is it raised above the ground or is it sitting on the ground?
right?
What's the purpose?
Hmm?
For the items that are more like flat work, what's the intent and then what's the goal behind introducing regulations for that piece?
You talking about basketball courts or tennis courts or something, is that what
Well,
you're?
I mean, there's a wide variety, so yeah, just in general.
So your question again was, why would we want to do that?
Why introduce that regulation?
I think from my perspective, I'll just give you an example. Well, when my daughter and her husband was looking for a house, we went and looked at a house. And it had a basketball court literally with big speakers,
Lights.
big lights, pool next to it, pool house next to it, literally on the lot line of the house next to it. And we looked at that and said, boy, this is a cool arena, but I don't think we want to buy this because the neighbors would just go nuts. And it was, and then it literally could light the place up. And it had huge big lights on it. And why would you want that next to your house? I wouldn't want that next to my house.
Anything that is that close is roughly.
It is, I mean, it's, so I'm looking at it from a standpoint, okay, we're talking about decks and this sort of thing, which are structures. Now, as we're talking, I'm going, I don't see a basketball court or a tennis court being any different than a deck. Getting so close to me that, I can reach over and pitch their ball off my, the first thing that's gonna happen, I'm building a 12-foot fence up, right?
Yep.
I hope you get a permit.
I'll get.
That's required for that. Well,
So that's kind of where I'm coming from, it just example of, and then I was doing some assessing work down in Bloomington this last weekend. And there's a guy that put a basketball court in the backyard, and I mean, it's 2 feet from the neighbors. Now, the lots there are 5 acres, so it isn't a big deal, but it's literally right next to his neighbor's lot line.
I was just we were talking about the height difference and if it's essentially a flat surface. What about an additional parking space right up against the lot line? Or in that particular case, is that a problem for the homeowner adjacent to that? Is it different than some of the other things we're talking about? I mean, I'm just saying that could be one of those things that's flat, right? 2 inches, 1 inch, grass level, ground level. I don't know if it is or not, or if it requires another height designation, but that could be one.
Yeah, and then you also get into driveways. The road commission at the road has rules about where driveways can go, but it's not uncommon for people to have an accessory building or a shed in the back that they want a driveway back around to. So I am a little bit leery of introducing a lot of restrictions on that kind of flat work.
How close can an accessory building be?
Depends on the size of the accessory building. So the smallest ones is about 5 feet away. And then for the larger ones, it's like 50 feet away, maybe 25, maybe 25 is the.
That seems like another, I mean, if we were consistent with that, it might make sense.
Yeah, that's based on the size of the accessory building as opposed to the size. Well, so the setback is based on the size of the accessory building. The maximum size of the accessory building is based on the size of the parcel.
I'm disinclined to try to regulate ground level things just because seems like you're gonna try and, it's gonna be trouble. People wanna do useful things and it's gonna be a pain to try to manage it, but then where do you say that's ground level and that's not ground level?
Well, and we could get very specific. I mean, I think the items that Terry mentioned were very specifically sports activities going right up against there. I mean, we could add something like tennis courts, basketball courts, similar need to be X feet away. Now, in an old neighborhood, does that mean that you cannot put a basketball hoop on your driveway if you're not far enough away from your neighbor's
Right.
parcel? It might get a little bit sticky. But you could just say like a freestanding court for that sort of thing as well.
Yeah.
You don't like this is gonna be a lot bigger than decks.
Well,
I don't wanna blow it up and try to fix a whole bunch of problems that aren't really there. Yeah, and then make it hard to deal with.
Want to make it easier for homeowners. Swimming pools, do you have thoughts on swimming?
Yeah, we do
pools?
wanna talk some, so if you would start.
So the issue with the swimming pools is if you have an above ground pool, sometimes people like to put decks on their above ground pools. And if you don't allow a deck anywhere else, in the backyard, you then allow a deck around a swimming pool that's above ground. I haven't. I have a large landing that was a little larger than a landing might normally be on a stairway. But that was as far as I felt like I could stretch that into conscience. So you've got an above ground pool. So for above ground pools, the setback requirement for that is 10 feet. In-ground pools are 4 feet from the property line. No distinction is made for the front yard. So that's just something to file away. Haven't had that issue, but that's not regular there either. But yeah, so backyard, above ground pool, what's your feeling on what you would like for it?
So they're 10 feet from the lot line, but typically 4 feet up, I think, above ground pool.
All right.
Yeah, not 3 runway, not
A
6
little
feet.
No, or
I think if it's under 24 inches, the building code doesn't call it a pool anymore. There's something like that, but they're typically about 4 feet. 3 to 4.
Yeah. And that's currently allowed within 10 feet. And that needs a railing, which raises it another 36 inches. So 7 feet. What's screaming?
I'm sorry, what are
Marco!
above ground pools, what, 10 feet?
10 feet.
I think that becomes a real visual something for somebody that is right next door to it. It's a visual thing.
Well, I think if you were to allow an additional deck around that above ground pool, that would then go over that 10 feet already. It's very intrusive, just like we were talking about the rest of the decks.
The 10 feet would typically be, well, I guess you could decide which direction you would like it to go, but you'd typically put it on the interior of the lawn.
Towards closer to the house, yeah.
But not, some people might want to put it all the way around there.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because I have seen the above ground pools with decks that go all the way around.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's a 10 foot, if they have a deck that goes all the way around, then the edge of that deck has to be still, meet that requirement of 10 feet. So they just have to push that further.
So right now, they're not, I haven't been allowing a deck because
At all.
there's, no, a stairway with a landing.
Okay,
And I've only had that come up once or twice.
so that's the question is, do we allow it any more than that?
Right,
Okay.
and my thinking being, if we're not allowing a deck elsewhere in that rear yard setback, then why would a deck that's higher than a lot of decks be permitted right in the middle of that?
Yeah.
setback?
That makes sense.
I think it wouldn't be, but you get again to some sort of rule of how far back are you and how high you go. It's like visually for me. If let's just say the pool deck is 4 feet high and you have a 3 foot rail. Does that have to be 10 plus 7? 17 feet back.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It's kind of a similar approach, right?
It's kind of, I don't have a whiteboard here, I have trouble. These markers work.
You have working markers in my.
Okay. Look at that.
Give us like geometry lesson.
This is a lot line here. And then if we were saying there's a 10-foot general setback, and then what I'm picturing is that this is the ground going back, and then you draw a line at some angle like this and say, if you want to be, we'll go 30 inches. This is a scale, 30 inches up, then you got to be 10 feet plus 30 inches. Or something like that. Why? How do you make a rule? That's the question. You could bring the 30 out to here.
It just moves visually, it just moves it back further.
But then if you want a second floor, if you say your 10 feet is where you can be, then can you build a deck? 20 feet up in the air at the 10-foot line? I don't think people would like that. But then the question is, okay, if that's the case, then how far back does this have to go to be okay? That, I mean, you see visually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a visual thing.
Yeah. So that's how I am a visual thinker, so that's what I see as angles stuff. You could say, okay, and if you want to change this and say, okay, you can run, it's 30 inches, you can run out to here. Now your angle maybe goes from there. Because there's going to be everything's going to be different heights. And you can say everything from 30 inches to 80 feet can be 15 feet back. Me, that's conceptually simple, as opposed to coming up with, if you're between this and this, then it could be this number, but if you're between this and this, you gotta be this number.
I think that makes sense, David.
Mika, that would be pretty easy to calculate, right? If somebody brought that in, if you did a 45.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be relatively easy to calculate. I think the question is primarily with the side yards set back and in some of the newer neighborhoods where you've got the second floor decks that are going to be closer to the parcel line than that. They're going to be at 10 feet.
Yeah.
But that, if you can spend time kind of looking at that and seeing how it would work out in real life.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that.
And that means if you have a deck and now you want to put a roof on it, now you gotta move back, get your choice. You can have a smaller deck with a roof, or you can have a bigger deck without a roof, something like that.
Swimming pools?
Swimming pools, back to swimming pools.
Oh, yeah.
We have a lot of existing, or a fair number of existing.
I would just think from a simplicity standpoint, the deck or the pool and any aperture to it cannot be closer than 10 foot from the lot line.
Right. But do we apply this thing where the taller it is, the further back it has to be?
I don't think so.
Well,
Personally.
that pools would be treated differently.
Are you talking above ground pool?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the other is 4 feet, in ground is 4.
Yeah.
That's 4.
Which,
That's surprising.
yeah,
That's just like, what? Really?
yeah. I'm
Yeah,
going,
you also
whoa.
have the fence.
Right. 3 foot, 36 inch?
Yeah, about.
For the
Fence
fence,
around
I
the
think it's 4 feet. I think
They can put a 4-foot fence around it.
around a pool, yeah, but not, it can't be visually obstructive in the lakefront lot. There are some limitations on that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I think I have some neighbors out of compliance on all of this stuff.
I'll let you know when we have a code enforcement officer on staff, and then you can tell me who those are.
Give me a call. Tip.
So I'm understanding you're saying with above ground pools, you could have the above ground pool with a deck as long as that deck is still 10 feet. Right? So no consideration that you've got that 4 feet and then on top of that, you're going to have a railing for said deck around the pool. Because to your
I think
point,
that's what's being suggested.
because to your point, I would be more in favor of than having a calculation, depending on how high that is, to increase that setback. Because yeah, you know, and sure, it makes a difference when you're thinking about lot size. In my neighborhood, that would be very intrusive. If you had a larger lot, not such a big deal.
By doing, if we go that way and we apply it also to decks or that are in the air, so to speak, in that 45, then it applies to everything similarly, which probably makes a lot of sense. And I'm comfortable with that, certainly.
Yeah, that's my.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
I
It's
think
consistent all the way around.
Yeah. A good point.
You're gonna have a fun month.
May have not been the best month to bring this up.
One of the things you mentioned was stairs. That's more beach stairs, are you thinking, or?
Primarily beach stairs.
Because deck walking stairs are generally not 45, they're lower than 45. So fit within that envelope pretty easily. But
there's already code for that, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know, you'd be some pretty.
We typically allow stairs within the setback.
What's that?
We typically allow stairs within the setback. That's.
Yeah, but as far as the angle of them.
Oh, the angle of the
Yeah,
stairs.
there's some.
Yeah, that's building codes.
Yeah, there's some pretty
Yeah.
stiff
Big
codes on
things.
that. Just trying to do all the calculations myself. I've never got stairs before.
So stairs, sorry, I kind of interrupted.
So for larger stairs, for beach stairs, and then for, second floor deck stairs. Kind of feels to me like second floor deck stairs should probably not be within whatever setback is established. Lower stairs.
Part of the deck.
Yeah, lower stairs are usually permitted. And then with beach stairs, we've had a couple that were built pretty close to the property line. It kind of seems like there should be at least a little bit of play between the property line and that stuff. Most people prefer to keep it off the property line, but I think there have been a handful of cases where I've kind of gotten complaints where a neighbor would like to preserve their view, and so then their next door neighbor is looking at somebody else's deck rail.
And I think in a case where you had two neighbors who wanted to share stairs, that would go to the ZBA. And I think would be reasonable, right? Because maintaining deck stairs is not always cheap, especially when they wash away.
Yeah, that's true. I would say though that we'd probably like to encourage things like less disturbance of the dune, sharing the costs, and whatever we can prevent going to the ZBA. That takes a lot of staff time, and it costs $350, and it's a 45-day lead time before the meeting in order to get all the noticing and things like that done. So it does require something. So I think trying to limit that is probably better.
Yeah, there's critical dune stuff, the Eagle gets involved. But yes, I agree, saving money, saving invasion of the dunes, and maybe that's something that staff can, I don't know how to handle that one, but we should allow people to work together and so on.
Does Eagle have to approve a stairway?
It depends. If it's less than 5 feet in width, if it's hand-dug posts only, and if it still allows a certain amount of sand movement around it, then it falls under a special exception that doesn't require a permit. Landings of a certain size are permitted, but if it turns into a deck, that does require a permit. If there's anything covered, then that also requires a permit. And the Eagle permitting process is not a joke. It is very rigorous. People usually figure it's gonna take at least 6 months to get through that. I have no idea the cost.
Have we come close enough to what you're looking for?
I think so. Let's go through the list.
Stairs, walkways, yeah, I think so.
Yes, I think we have. I think we covered everything. And if we didn't, I can go back to you next time. So-
Did we hit covered decks and porches? Are you good with that?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I've heard enough that I'll put something together. So I will hopefully, my intention, it would be to put this together in an ordinance format that you could review within that format. A lot of people want to build a lot of things and have a lot of questions right now. So if it ends up, and we still have some master plan stuff we're working through. So it's possible it would be less than that, but that would be what you should.
Thank you. Next item is the work plan. That's a did it.
Looks pretty good.
So these are the things to keep you busy while we're waiting for the master plan comments to come in. I think you've seen some of them. Most of the comments for the master plan have come to the planning. I've had a couple sent to me directly that I'll be sharing. As we wait for that to come back, we're working on these decks. I've also had a request internally to please get food trucks handled in some sort of way, because there are people who would like to see food trucks. So
Or not seafood. Right?
or well.
I actually just heard, I think it's on 16th Street. I think it's every Tuesday. They have a bunch of food trucks. They say it's a hit. I need to go check it out and see what it's all about. And we have a great opportunity right back there where those new restrooms are being built to start to activate this site. So it might be kind of cool.
Oh, in the hangar? So what you're saying?
Yeah, because I think they're putting restrooms in the hangar.
Yeah.
So you have to have paid parking, you have to have restrooms, and then you can start bringing food trucks in. That could be a really cool thing while we're waiting for other stuff to happen on this site.
Yeah.
So work fast.
But that,
Work fast.
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Next,
Who did I talk to?
Yeah.
that's next month, right?
So we're looking at restricting more of that.
Well, food trucks are not permitted in Park Township right now.
Oh, okay.
Trying to figure out how to permit it. And I think the general thought is we don't have that much commercial area. How really looking for less limitation and more expansiveness until we see an issue, and then we can reel it in. But I think that's the initial thought, something added is
Gotcha.
how generous can we be in that?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, never mind.
Yeah, and if, for instance, somebody wants a food truck or a party at their house, you know, a reunion or whatever, parked in the driveway, is that okay? How many food trucks on commercial property versus private?
One of the things I noted on what's next, you said, I think that first bullet, private road versus road commission. I'm stuck right in the middle of that right now, where I live, because there are differences.
Yes,
And so, yeah.
yeah. And I wonder if some of the road commission standards have changed over the years, because I think that there are things that are public now that they wouldn't accept as public roads. If they had come through now.
Yeah. Like where we are now 20 years ago, it was approved here. You know, but all of a sudden their standards have changed, so we would have to bring a private drive up to those standards now. So all of a sudden you're just going, oh, that's a huge cost, because now they want something different. A lot of it is how you manage water off of the edges of the roads.
That's the ditch.
Yes, that's the ditch.
And the sign ordinance, just so y'all know, you can, from what Dan keeps telling us, you can say whatever you want on the signs. We don't have any control. If you have to read it to know whether it's legal, you can't do that. Everything you can do is size and location. So,
You know, I know it's not on this list, but I think of a couple of things in the master plan. We talked about sustainability. What does that look like? And then I think in one of the person's comments this week, we talk about aesthetic guidelines, basically, what does exactly that mean? So to me, those are both things that are in the master plan that both need more definition.
So Dave, actually, do you want to hold up the sheet you have in front of you with the little colors on it? I was originally gonna hand this out this month, and I thought, well, this is a little bit premature. We really need to get the public comment back from the master plan before we start moving on that. But that's the list of all the items that are both ongoing and do right now items from the master plan. So kind of really when we get to the point in that process where we feel like we've received a comment, then we'll pull that out and jump along with kind of these little ordinance cleanup things.
That makes sense.
As well as master plan alongside of that.
I knew you had a plan for that.
any other questions, comments on that? Then we're on to item 8, which is other business and announcements. I don't have any.
I don't have anything from the board. Lynn has something from Tuesday's meeting, but I'm sure he's gonna share with us.
Yeah, Dave came to it, and so basically we received all the input from the community, so a lot of different inputs. So there's some data out there that's kind of leading us to like 10 big things we should consider doing. If I could do a 5-minute overview with a few slides, if you want to do that in a next meeting, if that's helpful. But basically, we are in June going to take the recommendation up to the trustees to say, this is what we've heard from the community. This is kind of what we're thinking. We'll take it to the staff here and get some input from both of them. And then over the summer months, we'll actually start looking at how do we resource it? How do we phase it? People were asking the other night, what would be a fee to rent a room or to participate in some of this? So we have to start to put some of the economics and the operations to it over the summer months. But September 16, we come back with a recommendation. It'll be an open public meeting, and we'll just present that. And then it'll basically be a building program that we'll have to figure out how we want to go. Do we want this to be design build? What approach do we want to use? And who do we invite to start getting proposals from? So I think that what I've been talking to Brian about is, I think there'll be a small subset as we do this, not the full committee now, but literally how we take it to bid. And then even as the design firms bring stuff in, we want to make sure it's consistent with the people that, put the building program together. So I think there'll be a small team that kind of continues to step beside this project as it's built, as it's designed and built. So a lot of work the team has been together for 9 months and have put a lot of time and thought into it. We have some really talented people that are bringing some great insights to it. So a lot of work still over the summer, but the ideas are really, really good.
How successful was Tuesday's meeting?
I thought it was just okay. I think
Have there many people?
I I haven't heard the number. The first meeting that we had in here was close to 100. So but it was an open house, so people could come and go. And so I would say over here, we maybe had, I don't know, what do you think, 60?
We have 80,
maybe.
I saw
yeah.
Heidi today, and I think she said it was in the 60, 70
It was-
neighborhood.
Yeah, I think we had, so I think it was a lot less, but it's the thing that I remember Howard saying, and he goes, it's not the fact of how many people showed up. I mean, the people that showed up are important, but we have to always be able to go back to say, these are the 4 touch points in terms of how we reached out to the community. We asked input. Here's what the data is telling us. So we have to give the community multiple opportunities to engage in different ways. So that way we can always say this, everybody is invited. And if you miss one, that's fine, because you can always catch up in the second one. There's other things out on the site. So I think we're doing a good job just trying to engage the community.
One other question I had was, how will the location of the building be determined?
So I still think that maybe you have some better insights, but what Howard and Brian were saying is basically, we're pretty safe to say that it's gonna go, right over here. And that's kind of where we're headed with it. I think until the insurance does the final payoff, we can't really say for sure, but it's like it's headed that it's going to be in that direction. So if the public asks us a question, we say the intent is for it to go here, and we need to kind of play out the rest of the
Southwest of this building. So,
yeah, and I think the big thing is the master plan that we look at and where you see parking lots and where you see outdoor play areas and splash areas, we're basically saying we're not deciding on any of that location. Because we really need to get the building in place, because there's some stuff that needs to connect to the building. You don't want to have a parking lot between your building and the pickleball courts, because so you have to really think about where your parking is. Somebody brought up a great point with all the traffic out on Ottawa Beach Road. Is your main entrance over here versus there, especially with all the speeding and the recent accidents over there. So I think that there's a larger zone around that community center that we need to look at before we start placing all of this other stuff. The Veterans Memorial.
anybody else? Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Support.
Right? Anybody? Discussion? No. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all. See you next month.